At the culmination of the first verse of the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, we find the description of the powers of the cosmic horse. And then the second verse continues that description. In distinguishing the two verses and their emphasis, Sri Aurobindo describes these powers thus. But then the Upanishad goes on to speak no longer of superficial circumstances, but of the powers of the horse. Some of these are material powers, the thunder, the lightning, the rain. But this is only the material description of and the material form of the powers. There is a greater power which is now taken up in the second verse. To recapitulate though, in the material powers, we saw the thunder, the lightning, the rain, and speech of the horse. And the lightning was the expression of the extension of his force, revealing knowledge. Thunder was the whole movement of his force forward, expressing his power. And the rain, in this case, Sri Aurobindo simply says, it suggests that from the mere waste matter of his body, this great power is able to fertilize the world and produce sustenance for the myriad nations of his creatures. We saw also last time in our study passages from the Veda, and the whole suggestion here of the lightning, thunder and rain is this descending power, descending movement by which things turn to material manifestation. And the whole most dense material world is nourished and fertilized, even created by this descending movement of knowledge, power and creative energy. And then the fourth power was speech. And of speech, Sri Aurobindo said, speech with its burden of definite thought is the neighing of this mighty horse of sacrifice. By that, this great power in matter expresses materially the uprush of his thought and yearning and emotion, the visible sparks of the secret universal fire that is in him, guha hitam, hidden in the cave. This description we read last time, but we did not fully see the suggestions that come with it. And here, briefly, we take it up before we move on. The distinction Sri Aurobindo makes is of the speech with burden of thought, which expresses something else, a brush of his thought, yearning and emotion. So there is a higher energy of expression which then takes on this thought form and the material vibration in speech. So there is here also a same movement of manifestation of something which is above in a more essential form, and from that essentiality it moves to concretization into matter, expresses materially the uprush of his thought and yearning and emotion. And then the visible sparks of the secret universal fire that is in him. So the source is in this secret universal fire deep in the cave, and from that secret fire, this is the divine will hidden in the cave, there is this outward movement which condenses eventually into the material vibration of form, and that is the creative power of his speech. Vag eva asya vak. Speech verily is the voice of him. So this creative movement of the divine, drawing out what is in its essential being, in its essentiality as the divine will, moves through the domain of thought, yearning, emotion, and then taking on the form of definite thought and materializing in material form eventually. This is the sequence of unfoldment of the creative word. What is important for us to note is this is not only a cosmic process by which the divine manifests by vibration into form, but it is also true of us individually. We are not conscious of it, but when we speak, there is behind the speech the yearning and emotion, behind that the direction of thought, and behind that unformed, something which seeks to express. If we could but become conscious of those deeper dimensions, we would find that what turns to express is at that moment formless and thoughtless. It is pure yearning of consciousness to move into expression, carrying in it a very rich, multifaceted content. As it moves from there into domain of thought, it becomes more fixed, more formed, and fills also with the emotion. And then after that, it moves to the physical vibration of physical thought and speech. In the Veda, they speak of all expression emerging not from the thinking in the head, but from the secret ocean in the heart. From where it rises in the head, there it takes on the form of thought, and then it moves into the externalizing mind and turns into physical speech. But if we could observe these stages and sequences of the energy of speech, vak, we would be able to consciously infuse in the most articulate form of speech that original power of which we are not conscious. It is even possible that when that power moves thus into the most material vibration, with very little specific form of speech, we would transmit much more that was intended in the originating impulse. And this is the experience we have when in the presence of spiritual speech. When the mother spoke, when she answered a question, she had only to say yes or no, and the full import of the knowledge and the intention would be transmitted in that physical form and vibration. And you would understand much more than just the yes or no speech could have conveyed. And it would fill you with an inspiration, with an affirmative power that would carry you through the whole action that was necessary. So such is the nature of the spiritual power of speech, a vak shakti. And in those who have cultivated it, it often takes the form that the speech tends to become, as they say, prophetic. Not so much that because it was spoken that something happened, that too is true, but what was seen was real, and the speech only articulated what was real. The other side of it is equally true, that when it is spoken, it releases into thought form and material vibration that power which was held behind, and starts a chain of cause and effect. It is this suggestion which you will see in Sri Aurobindo's Savitri, when Ashwapati asks Narada, "What is this shadow? What did you see?" And Narada says, "It is better not to reveal." And human beings are much more safe in their ignorance, and Ashwapati insists. And at that point, Sri Aurobindo uses specific words suggesting that as he speaks, he releases the chain of cause and effect by which now those events become inevitable. So this is that creative power and the Vak Shakti, which is the true speech of this mighty cosmic horse. It is by such a creative power that he manifests the whole cosmos and manifests his intention, manifests himself. But all this, still, Sri Aurobindo says, these are material powers: lightning, thunder, rain, speech. What is his greater power? And this is the theme of the second verse. We read the translation, Sri Aurobindo's translation of the second verse, and then his commentary. Well, first, in his commentary, Sri Aurobindo starts with, but the real powers, the wonderful fundamental greatnesses of the horse are, the sage would have us remember, not the material. What are they then? And so we see the second verse in translation, and you will see when we first read it, it is so profound as to be almost unintelligible. And Sri Aurobindo had warned us already that this is one of the most profound of the Upanishads and one of the most obscure. And we see the full obscurity of it in the second verse, and then Sri Aurobindo will reveal that profundity. Verse 2. Day was the grandeur that was born before the horse as he galloped. The eastern ocean gave it birth. Night was the grandeur that was born behind him, and its birth was from the other waters. These are the grandeurs that came into being on either side of the horse. And in the second half of the verse, he became higher and bore the gods, Vaja and bore the Gandharvas, Arvan and bore the Titans, Ashva and bore mankind. The sea was his brother, and the sea was his birthplace. Now, if we did not have the help of Sri Aurobindo's explanations, this would have been completely unintelligible to us. What is this grandeur that is day, which was born before the horse as he gallops? In front of the horse there is this day, and that is supposed to be his grandeur. And that grandeur of the day is born from the eastern ocean. So is he just talking of the sun rising on the east and the sun setting on the west? And what's the grandeur of the horse? What does it have to do with all that we have seen so far? And the grandeurs, these two grandeurs came into being on either side of the horse. How is this night a grandeur? How is it born from the other waters? And what are these other waters? Why is the sea his brother and at the same time his birthplace? And it's all very confusing and vague. We will of course look at the specific words in Sanskrit when Sri Aurobindo translates as the eastern ocean gave it birth. The word used in Sanskrit is the eastern ocean is the womb of this grandeur. And there's a very powerful suggestion there whose full meaning we will understand only after we have read Sri Aurobindo's commentary. So Sri Aurobindo says, what are they then? What are these wonderful fundamental greatnesses of the horse? The sunrise and sunset, day and night are their symbols. So these two fundamental greatnesses are symbolized by day and night and sunrise and sunset. Not the magnitudes of space, but the magnitudes of time. So first of all, we have already seen a little bit of the importance of time, kala, and the samvatsara, not kala, that is the self of the horse. But here, Sri Aurobindo again distinguishes time from space, and the earlier discussion will apply here. Not the magnitudes of space, but the magnitudes of time. Time, that mysterious condition of universal mind which alone makes the ordering of the universe in space possible. Although its own particular relations to matter are necessarily determined by material events and movements. For itself subtle as well as infinite, it offers no means by which it can be materially measured. So first of all, this time here is highlighted, and of time Sri Aurobindo reveals some great secrets. The magnitudes of time. And what is this time with a capital T? Time, that mysterious condition of universal mind, which alone makes the ordering of the universe in space possible. Now, all of this which he is revealing is going to be extremely important for what follows. But first of all, time is not a material thing. You cannot catch time. You cannot even measure time in its essence. How do you measure time? By observing some material process. So because the water was pouring, something floating on the water rose so many centimeters of space. Therefore, we say so much time has passed. This was the earliest form of clock. Or the sun has moved and the shadow has shifted so much. Therefore, we say so much time has passed. Again, these are early forms. In modern forms, what do? We have a wound up spring which is slowly allowed to be released. How fast you release it is controlled, and so how much the needle moves, therefore so many hours or minutes or seconds have passed. But all of these are so dependent on other processes. You cannot know the time by sundial if there are clouds. If the water pours faster or slower, you cannot know how much things have risen. With the clock, if you do not wind it, you cannot see the time. Even if you wind it, if the temperature increases too much or drops too much, the metal of the clock expands or contracts slightly, and that changes the timing mechanism, and the clock goes faster or slower in summer or winter. What do we do then? In current science, the best we can go to, we go down deep into matter. At its most fundamental processes, most unstable and yet most reliable in their instability, we observe the vibration of a single atom, held in a very special environment, control of temperature and vibration. And there's a particular vibration of light as released by the atom, which is precisely measured, and from there we are able to measure, cut out, through the spatial extension of those vibrations, we map time. And this is what we call an atomic clock. But all the time, you notice, the only way to measure time is by a spatial process. Where is time? What is it in essence? It is non-material. What is it? The condition of universal mind, which alone makes the ordering of the universe in space possible. Although its own particular relations to matter are necessarily determined by material events and movements. So, when you want to know that time in its essentiality, you can know it, of course, across the cosmos, across all the levels of the worlds. But when you relate it to matter, then we find it is somehow tied to material events and movements and processes. And so that's how we can somehow capture time in material process and so measure it. The moment you shift out of matter, you cannot capture time anymore the same way. You step out of your gross body in dream time, dream space, and you can spend hours and come back into the body and find that in material time only 5 minutes have passed. Or in dream space and time, you've spent barely 5 minutes, you return and you find hours have passed in material time. In matter, and this is the greatness of the material world, everything is entangled. Even that mysterious condition of universal mind that we call time, when it is entangled in matter, it has a certain objectivity. But when you observe that same time in the subtle worlds, in the subtle physical, in the vital and in the mental, as you proceed, the time becomes more and more fluid and flexible. So much so that in the mental worlds you can even go back in time, you can even play with events observe other outcomes in time and get thoroughly confused as to what is objective reality. But when you come back into matter, in the material body, suddenly everything coalesces into the rigidity of matter. And this is the great importance giving to the material world. Remember, in the horse's description, the material world is his placement. His feet are in matter. And so all of the cosmos, with all its great freedom and wideness and fluidity and power of creation, narrows down and rigidifies when it reaches the embedding in matter, and all including this mysterious condition of universal mind. In its particular relations to matter are necessarily determined by material events and movements. So if we observe what it does in matter, we get a glimpse of what it's actually doing in other domains more freely, more flexibly. And what does it do in matter? It creates an order, a sequence, and it binds things in that order and sequence, arranges them. When we speak of organizing something, let's say we are planning some great event. Whatever the nature of the event, however trivial or however great, you will find you have to arrange. And you have to arrange in space and sequence in time. In both cases, it is an arrangement. You have to place certain things before, certain things after, in space and in time. But in order to place even in space, you need time. So when you plan out the spatial arrangement, you have to take into account how much time it takes. Now this becomes critical, especially when it is a large event. People have to come such a great distance, and so they need that much time. These objects have to be prepared and matured to be like this. The mangoes have to ripen, the food has to be cooked. It takes so much time. And then, of course, it has to be arranged in this way in space. That follows. But you see how essential time is even in arrangement of physical space. And then, of course, there is a sequencing in time. First, this will be presented. Then that, and then it will end with the other. The sequencing of time becomes critical. You cannot rearrange, change that sequence of time and still expect the same outcome. When you prepare food, for example, you have to light the fire first, and then only the material can be put in. Now you could start cutting vegetables before you light the fire, or you could light the fire and then start cutting vegetables. Will it make a difference? And we find it does make a difference, though trivial. But only after you have lit the fire can you put the vegetables to be heated. You cannot put the vegetables to be heated, take them out and then light the fire. Everything goes wrong. So there is this sequence of arrangement that time brings in. Even what apparently is purely spatial arrangement depends on time. So the power of time is which alone makes the ordering of the universe in space possible. So the spatial arrangement depends on time, and the outcome of the spatial arrangement depends also on the time. In other words, nothing in space would be ordered if it was not for this time. And what is time now? Mysterious condition of universal mind. It is as if the cosmic creative mind puts itself in a certain condition in which it arranges, organizes and orders the universe in space, in right relation of things. And that arrangement or the power to arrange is time, capital T. Mysterious condition of universal mind. Now this will become much clearer as we go along, but already we have a sense of it. Unless the creative power of the universe, the supramental creative power, unless it organizes things and puts them in right relation, you will not have an ordered universe. You'll only have chaos. And this power by which it arranges is this time. And what is time? For itself subtle as well as infinite, it offers no means by which it can be materially measured. You cannot measure time because it is too subtle, as well as infinite. It has in its grasp at each moment the totality of the cosmos. So when in material space we say, I put this in front of that, what does the word front mean? The word has no meaning unless you take into account the whole universe. Relative to the whole universe and its present arrangement, this is front, that is back, and this is the way the arrangement has to be. So the movement by which this organization and arrangement takes place takes into account the totality, and yet what it does is so far outside form that it is almost intangibly subtle. So subtle as well as infinite, it offers no means by which it can be materially measured. And now we come to the way this is captured as the two powers of the horse. Sunrise and sunset, that is to say, birth and death, are the front and hind part of the body of the horse, time expressed in matter. So when this time is expressed in matter, we see it in two powers. The front is this sunrise, that is birth. The back is the sunset, that is death. But now we go deeper into what this means. But on day and night, the sage fixes a deeper significance. Day is the symbol of the continual manifestation of material things in Vyakta, the manifest, or fundamentally in Sat, in infinite being. Night is the symbol of their continual disappearance into Avyakta, the unmanifest, or finally into Asat, into infinite non-being. So this day and night, capital D, capital N, they represent something. The day is the continual manifestation of being in the manifest, Vyakta. Night is the continual disappearance into the unmanifest, Avyakta. So there is something which comes into manifestation, something which fades into the unmanifest. These are the two powers. The coming into manifest is day, the going into unmanifest is night. But Sri Aurobindo shows us three levels of this process. On both of the powers, there are 3 degrees, 3 stages. The appearance coming into manifestation, but specifically of material things, or fundamentally in Sat, in infinite being. So we have the emergence of something that comes into manifest being. Let us say, in human development, we have gone through so many stages of exploration, of creation, and as we go along, we create something new which was not before. We could speak of technological creations, but it will be easier to begin with something more personal as a painting. You sit down and you try to express something. Before you expressed it, it didn't exist, in matter at least. When you sat down to create it, nobody ever in the whole universe's history had ever expressed that particular form in that particular way, in that particular pattern, in that rhythm. What comes out from you, what emerges into manifestation is unique. It has never been before. On the other side, as this painting has been expressed, eventually it moves out of your hands, eventually it breaks down, the colors fade, the paper breaks down, or is destroyed by water or sun or some other human intervention. After it ceases, let us say it is now eventually broken down into powder, where is the painting? It is gone. It is no more manifest. So in its most material expression, you see an object which has come into being, which was not, and now that object has vanished, it no more exists. Where is that particular article that Sri Aurobindo wrote, which later was eaten up by white ants? He translated Kalidasa's Meghadutam. That was put away in a box, and then they discovered a few years down the line it had been eaten by white ants. And Sri Aurobindo said, "Oh, it's a pity, it was a good translation." Where is it now? It's gone. Can you bring it back? No. If you could create a time machine, perhaps you could project yourself into the past. But well, it doesn't appear that such a thing is possible. You can see perhaps the imprint of the past memory in the Akashic records, even relive it in that sense, but the thing in its material form is gone. So that's why we are discussing not the subtle reality of things, but their material reality. There's a form that comes and the form is now gone. Where is the powder of the paper on which it was written? That was digested by the ants. It is now part of the earth. That is still there. But the writing and the particular arrangement of paper is gone. So we see here this movement of time that has gathered a material arrangement into being, and then as it has turned its attention away, that material arrangement has been dispersed. Matter is still there. The idea of the thing, the memory of it is still there in our minds, but the material form has vanished, gone. And where has it gone? The unmanifest. It is no more manifest, it has become unmanifest, or finally into asat, into infinite non-being. So in the extreme, there is the infinite being sat, and on the other side there is the infinite non-being asat. From that infinite being something comes to manifest, that is the second stage, and then it takes on material form, that is the third stage. From this third stage again, it moves into dissolution, tending towards the unmanifest, second stage, and then eventually, finally into infinite non-being, asat, first stage. So we have 3 degrees of emergence, 3 degrees of dissolution, but all go back to that fundamental sat and asat, from which things emerge, into which they go back. Now these two are extremely important because they represent extreme degrees, of which Sri Aurobindo will give us a very important reference from the Gita shortly. They appear according to the swift movement of this horse of the world, anu ajayata, or as I have written, translating the idea and rhythm of the Upanishads rather than the exact words, as he gallops. They appear as he gallops. This is what Sri Aurobindo says. Day is the greatness that appears in his front. Night is the greatness that appears in his rear. Whatever this time spirit, this zeitgeist turns his face towards or arrives at as he gallops through time, that appears, or as we say, comes into being. Whatever he passes away from and so leaves, that disappears out of being, or as we say, perishes. Not that things are really destroyed, for nothing that can be destroyed, for nothing that is, can be destroyed. Na abhavo vidyate satah. This is from the Gita. But they no longer appear. They are swallowed up in this darkness of his refusal of consciousness. For the purposes of manifestation, they cease to exist. All things exist already in Parabrahman, but all are not here manifest. There they are already there in being, not in time. The universal thought expressing itself as time reaches them, they seem to be born. It passes away from them, they seem to perish. But there, they still are. in being, but not in time. These two greatnesses of the appearance of things in time and space and their disappearance in time and space act always and continuously so long as the horse is galloping, and they are his essential greatnesses. Now we get a picture of what this is all about, and we see it is something so profound, and we will come back to the imagery used and we'll see how suggestive that imagery is. But what we are seeing here is the movement of this energy, the horse. As it moves forward, what it sees, what it turns to, comes into manifestation. What it leaves behind and ceases to pay attention to slides out of manifestation in space-time. But those things are always there in Parabrahman, in being, but not in time, and therefore not in space. This power which sees and turns to see, and by seeing casts into time and space, that is his greatness. And the same power by which, when he refuses to see or ceases to pay attention, it lapses out of space-time and resolves itself back to where it always was, in pure being. That power to withdraw from space and time and dissolve, that is his other greatness. And these are his two greatnesses. Now this in brief. Now we'll look at some very important suggestions which come along the way. First suggestion which comes in the use of this word time spirit, this zeitgeist. Sri Aurobindo never uses a word without meaning. By drawing on this term zeitgeist, which is a modern term, time spirit, which is a literal translation of zeitgeist, but also of the Sanskrit term, he's connecting certain dots. This term itself originated in a phase of philosophical exploration in Germany, and it's a German word, Zeit, time, Geist, meaning spirit, literally time spirit, emerged from the studies of the Veda and the Upanishad. This concept of time spirit itself came from those studies and was given a certain form in the German thought, philosophical thought. But there it had a certain character, a quality which is present in the Sanskrit origins, but which is lost in the English translation of time spirit. And this quality is the compulsion, the quality of inevitability. When we speak of Kala, Kala is this time, but time as conscious spirit. What he does is irresistible, is compelling, is inevitable. So when Kala chooses to create, it is inevitable. No one can stop it. Whoever tries to intervene and prevent is also absorbed in the whole process. And equally, what Kala chooses to drop, to erase, to dissolve, to destroy, no one can prevent. And even those who seek to prevent are themselves lost in the drift and the flow of Kala. And so there is this very clear sense of an intention, a purpose, and an inevitability. A conscious being that creates, that drives, that compels. And this sense is there in the Sanskrit and in the German use of this word Zeitgeist. But when you simply translate as time spirit, the sense is not so obvious. So by referring to this word Zeitgeist, Sri Aurobindo is linking the particular forms of Western philosophical expression with this idea. We have this idea also that at that time, when the time spirit chooses to be in a certain mood, in a certain way of being, thinking, expressing, pushing forward certain values, everybody is pulled into it. When the time spirit changes and now draws a different thought, a different value system, different ideas, everybody is pulled into those. And they find it very difficult to understand the earlier stages of the time spirit of thinking. This is the problem we are facing when we look at, for example, these texts of the Vedic or Upanishadic thought. The mindset of that age, the thought, the form, the values of that age are so different from the modern mindset. Sri Aurobindo, of course, bridges the two, but we may use his commentary now and what he has already shown us to assist ourselves using images more easy for the modern mind with which to link to what we are seeing here. There is a being in which all exists. In pure Parabrahman, all possibilities of everything that could and can ever be in space and in time, in creation. Anything you can imagine, even and all that you cannot imagine, is all there. But it's not manifest. Out of that, all possibility, something is pushed forward into manifestation in space and time. What is pushed forward is freely chosen by Parabrahman. And as it is pushed forward, something else that was pushed forward is withdrawn. So there is a continuous movement of something being pushed forward and something being withdrawn. And it is this movement which is our sense of the unfolding time. If something was pushed forward and held statically, we would not have a sense of time. Things would simply be frozen, stuck, like an image. The universe painted once is now frozen. But what we see is an unfolding process of pushing forward and at the same time withdrawing. Because when things are pushed forward, not everything can be at the same time. The cat cannot be dead and alive at the same time, in spite of quantum physics. It has to be alive at some point and it has to be dead at another point. And this sequencing, when it is pushed to be alive, the possibility of its death is withdrawn. When it is pushed to be dead, the possibility of its being alive is withdrawn. So there has to be an arrangement, a sequencing to be able to manifest a universe of order. In pure being, it is dead and alive and everything in between, born and unborn, and all the stages of its growth and all the activities which it could do, all held together. Including even the cat jumping 100 meters in a single leap is held as a possibility. But when it moves to manifest, those possibilities of the cat jumping 100 meters, a cat sprouting wings and flying, they have been held back. And only this capacity of the cat to leap a meter or two, to express in a certain way, that is put forward. And so we have an ordered, structured universe. Someday in the future, from that Parabrahman's immense infinite possibilities, the cat who can sprout wings at will could also be manifested. But there is a sequence, there is a rhythm in which that would be right. So we see this ordering power by which things are brought into manifestation in space-time. At the same time, by another power, they are pulled out and dissolved from space-time. But they exist always in Parabrahman. And we will use now a modern imagery. Let's say you walk into a museum. Everything has been arranged there, but it's all in darkness. You do not see. When you switch on the torchlight, you see what is in front of you. And the light reveals, brings into awareness what exists. And as you move forward, new things come into your awareness, into light, and the old things gradually fade into the darkness, out of the light. And as you walk around wandering in the museum, things get lit up, brought into awareness, and then fade out into darkness, lack of awareness. But they continue to exist exactly as they were in the totality of the museum. It is your power of awareness which brings into light or allows to fall back into darkness. It is your intention of energy by which you move and wander to choose what next you will bring into light, what you will allow to fall into darkness. As you move around, you bring into manifestation in light and you allow to lapse into darkness by your free actions. Although all the time nothing has moved, nothing has changed. And this is an analogy with which we can see how things exist always in Parabrahman, nothing moves ever, and yet they are allowed to emerge into manifestation or lapse into the unmanifest. Now we will take it one more step. Imagine now, we as this creative power, as the horse. And in Parabrahman, all possibilities arranged as in the museum, but in 3 dimensions. Everything is there. Nothing left out. And our creative power, the energy by which we bring into awareness, is the light of the torch. As we turn our gaze to something, it comes into manifestation in matter. And as we turn our gaze to something, our gaze turns away from something else. That lapses out. And this awareness which we have brought, by which things are cast into manifestation in matter, is the creative power of the horse. This power to withdraw awareness is the creative power of the horse to lapse into the unmanifest. And that's why you will see in the text the word womb is used. It's as if drawing out from unmanifest into manifestation and then pushing back into the unmanifest is the creative power, the womb power, the womb greatness of this, by which the day and the night as powers of the horse emerge. Now if you look at the whole universe as we see it today, as we experience it, it is, you may now look at it this way, the divine consciousness turning his attention, turning his creative gaze and wandering in his infinite possibility. And as he turns his gaze and wanders, things come into manifestation. And as he drifts away from things in his awareness, they fall out of manifestation. This is the divine freedom as he wanders. The horse galloping in his freedom can choose to go wherever he goes. But where he goes, what he sees comes into manifestation by his creative power and lapses out of manifestation by his creative power. And this is the reason why the future is not set. When you observe the divine will, the divine intention, it is entirely free in its source. In its utter freedom, it can do what it likes, create what it likes, follow as it wants in infinite possibility. And yet, as it moves, the things towards which it looks in the cutting edge of the light, where just things are emerging out of darkness into light, those to us appear as inevitable in the future. It is inevitable that one day humanity will wake up to its higher potential. It is inevitable to our sight because he has already seen that and chosen that as his outcome. But that is still on the edge, the fringe of the light. It has not yet come into material manifestation. Similarly, the past and the barbarism of the past in which human beings could be treated as objects, that in which human beings could be entirely coarse and crude and insensitive, that he has already turned his attention away from, he has turned his back to, and is rapidly drifting and bordering the edge of the darkness. And therefore, as human beings, we look at those kinds of behavior and we say, this is barbaric, to be shunned, to be rejected. And nobody in humanity can say, this is what I want. Because the time spirit, the zeitgeist, the divine will in its intention, the great horse, the cosmic horse, has turned away from it. His back is now turned to it, and it is lapsing therefore into the unmanifest. So the day and night are these two powers of continual manifestation of material things emerging out of infinite being, Sat, and on the other side, continual disappearance into the unmanifest, finally into Asat, into infinite non-being. And Sri Aurobindo says, as he has described, translating idea and rhythm, not exact words, they appear as the swift movement of the horse of the world gallops. And so he says, whatever this time spirit, this zeitgeist turns his face towards or arrives at as he gallops through time, that appears, or as we say, comes into being. Whatever he passes away from and so leaves, that disappears out of being, or as we say, perishes. Not that things are really destroyed, for nothing that is can be destroyed. And he quotes from the Bhagavad Gita, Na abhavo vidyate sata. The full verse is interesting when he quotes a fragment. We should look at the whole. And the verse basically says, Nasato vidyate bhavo, na bhavo vidyate satah. From the non-being, nothing can really emerge. Nor from the being, something emerging, can it ever be dissolved. In other words, what exists in being is forever in existence, even though it does not remain in manifestation. And what is non-existent can never come into being because it is forever non-existent. Ubhayorapi drishtantas tvanayos tattvadarshibhi. Those who see the essential truth, they see both of these and the origin of both. So the idea is the essential truth is in the origin from which this being and non-being come. And we are seeing two great powers coming from that same one origin. And these are the two great powers. All things exist already in Parabrahman, but all are not here manifest. They are already there in being, but not in time. The universal thought, capital T, expressing itself as time, reaches them, they seem to be born. So the thought here is the thought of God, the mind of God, where he turns his attention to something. And that's why it's thought, capital T. And that thought expressing itself as time, the creative power of time is this thought in expression. And that's why right at the beginning he said, time, that mysterious condition of universal mind, which alone makes the ordering of the universe in space possible. And we see now how profound that description was. As he turns, he casts into form but puts into order at the same time. What is held in Parabrahman as simultaneous all possibility is chaos, it is not order. And when he turns his thought and brings into form, he puts into order as he puts it into manifestation in space and through time. Now again we go back to another example which Sri Aurobindo has used elsewhere. The creator of a drama, when he sits down to create, in his consciousness everything is possible. All possible styles of drama are possible. All possible figures that he could have ever conceived are already there, unmanifest. He has not even thought about them. But they are there in potential. He could think about anything. And then he chooses to think of something. And the moment he chooses to think, he draws out of that infinite possibility, which is chaotic, he draws out of it a certain limited bundle of possibilities. But yet he has not given a form to them. So in the drama which I conceive, there is a clash of energies, there's a clash of circumstances. These are the kinds of things which will happen. This is the mood of the drama. These are the kinds of figures who can express it, but yet nothing is arranged, sequenced. It is just a certain urge, an impulse, and a mood which is held. And then out of that, a sequencing takes place, a prioritizing takes place, in which I do not give the full life story from birth to death of this hero. I select the highlight of this phase of his life when he faces this crisis and this challenge. And then I bring in these different facets and elements which are drawn out into manifestation, which would otherwise be latent, and highlight those. And then still at that point, it is all there in thought. It has not been given form of word. When it moves to be given in form of word, there is a further sequencing and rigidifying. When it moves into form of word, I will not follow the sequence of events as they occur in time. I arrange them in space differently. I put the ending first. The hero is now watching the sunset and sees this whole culmination of his crisis. Things are changing, and it's a flashback in which the rest of the earlier part of the story is narrated. So I can change in spatial arrangement what in this time sequence has a certain meaning, is rearranged in space to be able to express in a different way. I break into certain words, certain sequences of sentences, and so on. So these represent 4 stages through which that which is held in infinite potential chaotically is pulled into manifestation and given material form. So these are the 4 stages of Brahman. And we see this idea of drawing out into manifestation and then taking back, lapsing into the unmanifest, as the 2 great powers of this cosmic horse. The 4 stages are not described, they are implied. So, the universal thought expressing itself as time reaches them, they seem to be born. It passes from them, they seem to perish. But they still are in being, but not in time. And you see why the universal thought is the term used to describe this power of drawing out to manifest. These 2 greatnesses of the appearance of things in time and space and their disappearance in time and space act always and continuously so long as the horse is galloping, and they are his essential greatnesses. In other words, if ever this divine energy, as the divine cosmic horse, stops galloping, then the whole universe would simply lapse. It would cease to be. Because the divine is always moving forward, galloping in his movement to manifest, therefore the universe always moves forward. The sense of God shall grow up while the wise men talk and sleep comes here. The universe is always moving forward because God, in his manifestation, is moving forward. And if you keep on dwelling on things which are not part of the forward movement, you also drift and lapse into the past, into dissolution. And this is why Sri Aurobindo says, there is no idea which is so powerful as an idea whose time has come. When the idea comes, when it seizes you, it has full power. If you do not catch it then, if you do not turn it into action at that point, after a while the idea fades, it loses power because already God has moved forward. The idea revealed then is tending now, drifting towards that past, towards dissolution, and it has lost its energy. So these are the 2 essential greatnesses. Etau vai mahimano, he repeats from the Sanskrit. The birth of one is in the eastern ocean, of the other in the western, that is to say in Sat and Asat, in the ocean of being and the ocean of denial of being, or else in Vyakrita Prakriti and Avyakrita Prakriti, occult sea of chaos, manifest sea of cosmos. So these are the 2 oceans, the ocean of cosmos, things coming into order, and then the sea of chaos into which they lapse back into disorder. So this last portion we will review next time, and there are many important suggestions by the references of the Sanskrit. And why east and why west, we will understand when we take it up next Sunday. So we reread the verse and we can meditate on its profound significance which Sri Aurobindo reveals to us. Day was the grandeur that was born before the horse as he galloped. The eastern ocean gave it birth. Night was the grandeur that was born behind him, and its birth was from the other waters. These are the grandeurs that came into being on either side of the horse.